We are going to start in Birmingham, Alabama, with a 23-year-old woman named Amaya Sumlin, because on a Sunday morning in April she was breathing on her own, and by the following Saturday she was gone. And the only thing anybody can agree on is that she was shot one time in the head after a fight at a gathering. Everything else, the who and the why and the man that people online keep whispering about, is still a fog that nobody in a uniform has ever cleared up. She fought for 6 days on a machine at the hospital before her body finally quit, and the woman who turned herself in for it was only 1 year younger than she was.
Bringing a gun to a fist fight is not the solution. Once the trigger is pulled, that could be the end of the victim and the shooter.
But before we get into Amaya's story, and before we get to the shootout in Birmingham that put 168 bullets into an apartment courtyard, let us start with this one, because this is the story that shows you how quick a golden boy can throw the whole thing away with his own 2 hands. His name is Avante Travion Williams, and if you followed high school football in Florida around 2020, you already know that name, because he came up as one of the best defensive backs in the entire country. He was a DeLand High School kid, a 4-star recruit, and depending on which recruiting service you trusted, he was ranked as the #1 safety in his class and a top 50 player in the whole nation. Colleges were not just calling him, they were tripping over each other to land him, and by the time he was ready to put pen to paper, he had turned down offers from Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Ohio State, and Oregon. That is the kind of hype most kids only ever daydream about, and he was carrying it before he was even old enough to legally buy himself a drink. By his senior year at DeLand High, even with an injury slowing him down, he was piling up tackles and forced fumbles and picking off passes, earning all-area honors and national recognition, the sort of season that turns a local kid into a name people say with pride at the barbershop. When signing day came, and he chose Miami over all those blue blood programs, it was treated like a win for the whole town, a DeLand Bulldog heading to the big stage to make everybody proud. That is the version of Avante Williams that his community wants to remember, the fast kid with the bright future. And it's worth holding that picture in your head, because the story we are telling is about how far a person can fall from the picture people had of them. The wild part is how early it all started for him. Watch the local reporter explain just how young this boy was when the big programs first came knocking on his door.
Williams was being recruited to play football before he even started high school. He was offered a football scholarship to the University of Florida when he was in the 8th grade.
Sit with that for a second, because it tells you everything about the weight this kid was carrying. A scholarship offer in the 8th grade before he had ever played a single down of varsity ball, which means the whole town had already looked at a middle schooler and decided he was going to the league. He committed to the University of Miami, and for a little while it looked like the story was going to write itself the way everybody wanted. He played for the Hurricanes from 2020 through 2022, appearing in 17 games over that stretch, picking off a pass, chasing down ball carriers, doing the things that first got him noticed. Then he transferred to the University of Maryland for the 2023 season before his college run quietly came to an end, and he headed back home without a professional contract waiting for him. To really grasp how big the fall was, you have to understand what the scouts saw when he was young. They looked at his speed and his instincts and the way he could line up all over the secondary, and they were comparing him to Budda Baker, a real Pro Bowl safety in the NFL, projecting him as the kind of player who could get drafted and get paid. He had the frame, the range, and the ball skills, and coaches in some of the biggest programs in the sport had all decided he was worth chasing. When a talent like that ends up back in his hometown with no team calling, folks start whispering, and the whispers had reasons behind them, because the football was never really the whole story with him. There were signs off the field that the same fire that made him a hitter on defense could turn into something darker when the pads came off, and the record shows the trouble did not stop at that one dropped case in Miami. Here's the part that turns this from a clean success story into something a lot heavier, because the trouble did not begin in that bar in 2025. It started years before, and there were warnings all along the way. Back in 2021, while he was still wearing a Miami uniform, he was arrested for charges of aggravated battery on a pregnant woman, who was reported to be his girlfriend at the time. The school suspended him and then dismissed him from the team entirely. Listen to how the local station covered it back then when he was walking out of that jail with a blanket thrown over his head and absolutely nothing to say to anybody.
Hey, Avante, do you have anything to say? Police. Police say that you beat your pregnant
No,
girlfriend,
no
did you?
comments, no comments, please.
The accuser later took her statement back, so the charges were dropped, and he was reinstated after serving a 6-game suspension. He got the second chance that a whole lot of people never get. Most folks in his shoes would have run from any hint of trouble after living through that, would have treated that dropped case like a gift, and stayed as far from a police report as humanly possible. The pattern didn't really break, though, and that's the piece you have to keep tucked in the back of your mind as we walk toward that night in May. Because the man who was accused of pulling the trigger already had a camera catch him once before walking out of a jail with his face covered up. To understand the night everything came apart, you have to actually meet the man who died, because for a long stretch the internet couldn't even agree on who he was or what he did for a living. His name was Keshad Ahmad Harris, 32 years old, and he was a lifelong DeLand resident who chased music on the side under the name Southside Shad. He wasn't a superstar, and nobody's going to pretend he was, but he was real about the craft, dropping tracks and shooting music videos going back to 2019, running an Instagram page under that same handle, and even putting out a new collaboration only a couple of months before he was killed. He had a child at home and a woman he had been building a life with for years, and by just about every account, he was a local man trying to make something out of a small town. His life wasn't spotless, and it would be dishonest to pretend it was, because years back, in 2014, he had a run-in with the law over drugs in that same town. But by the time he died, the picture people painted was of a man who had shifted his focus towards his music and his family, dropping songs and shooting videos and posting collabs like somebody chasing a dream rather than trouble. When he was killed, the community didn't treat him like a headline. They treated him like one of their own, holding a candlelight vigil in his memory where the people who knew him lit candles and left tributes to Southside Shad, the local artist and father who was gone too soon. That matters because in all the noise about the football star who shot him, it's easy to forget that the person on the floor of that bar was a whole human being with a kid, a girl, a catalog of songs, and a town full of people who loved him. That woman was Decasia Bing, and the two of them had been together for right around 6 years, a relationship that police say ran hot and cold over the same thing that quietly wrecks a lot of relationships, which is jealousy. On the night of May 2nd, Bing went to a nursing graduation celebration at the Chisholm Community Center, and while she was there, a group of men rolled through, and one of them was Avante Williams. Another man in that group, Damian Ramsey, tried to slide up and get Bing's number, and she turned him down. But by then, the word was already traveling back to Harris through social media posts from the party, and Harris texted her that he was on his way. He showed up, they argued outside, and the two of them left in separate cars, both of them heated. That right there should have been the end of the whole thing. A jealous argument, a couple that leaves mad, everybody goes home and sleeps it off and feels stupid about it in the morning. Instead, police say the whole cloud of tension followed everybody straight to McCabe's bar in the early hours of May 3rd. Harris got there first, and about 20 minutes later, Williams and his group walked in behind him. Here's the detail that police leaned on the hardest, because it is the one that is really difficult to explain away as an accident. Investigators say the iPhone that Williams left behind at the scene showed he had searched Harris's Instagram, that same Southside_Shad page, roughly an hour before the two of them ever came face to face. In other words, he knew exactly who he was looking at before the first word was ever exchanged. When they finally squared up inside that bar, the whole thing moved in a matter of seconds. Harris punched Williams in the jaw, Ramsey hit Harris from behind, and Williams pushed Harris back, pulled a handgun from his pocket, and started shooting. He hit Harris in the rib cage, and as Harris dropped and went still on the floor, the shots kept coming, catching him in the back while Williams ran past him toward the door. Listen to the police captain describe the kind of person who fires into a packed room full of strangers without caring who is standing in the way.
The perpetrator pulled out a gun, and it appears to me that the perpetrator did not care who was around. He pulled out the gun, and his intended target was in front of him, and that's who he wanted to shoot. And it didn't matter who was around. Obviously, he shot the bartender.
It did not matter who was around, and the living proof of that is a bartender named Courtney Rickman, who was not part of any of this beef and only stepped in to try to break up the fight. She caught a bullet clean through both of her hands. She lived, thank God, but she came out of that hospital learning how to do the simplest everyday things all over again. Listen to her describe what the doctors had to do just to put one of her hands back together.
So my right hand right now has 6 pins in it, and some wires. It's extensive nerve damage, ligament damage, tissue damage, and all three metacarpal of my fingers.
And here she is on what that night did to her mind, because the truth is, the body heals a lot slower than people think, and the memory of a thing like that does not really heal at all.
It was the most terrifying thing I've ever been through. It happened so fast that I didn't really have time to get scared when it happened, but it keeps coming back. It replays in your mind over and over.
Harris was carried out to a truck by other patrons and rushed to Advent Health DeLand, where he was pronounced dead. The autopsy found he had been shot 7 times, with 6 of those bullets still lodged in his body. Williams ran out of there, but a license plate camera system tracked the getaway car, a black BMW, from DeLand toward New Smyrna Beach, and that trail helped police piece the whole night back together. Watch the police captain lay out just how reckless the whole scene was, right down to the weapon itself.
The gun appeared to be concealed. It was a .40 caliber gun that was used. The victim was shot 6 times.
2 days later, on May 5th, Williams turned himself in at a lawyer's office and was arrested without a fight. He was charged with second-degree murder with a firearm and ordered held with no bond. Keep in mind that there were around 40 people packed into that bar when the shooting went off, any one of whom could have been that bartender, or worse. Watch the police chief stand at the podium and try to make sense of the whole senseless thing in a single breath.
This was a incident that occurred that should not have occurred, but it did. And we are not happy about it here in DeLand, but
as of the most recent records, Williams is still sitting inside the Volusia County Branch Jail with no bond, and no trial has actually happened yet. Now, if you're sitting there thinking a former college athlete has no chance in a case like this, history says do not be so quick. Back in 2012, in Charlotte, North Carolina, a former University of North Carolina player named Keenan Gay got into it at a bar when a heavily drunk man put his hands on Gay's girlfriend. Gay shoved the man out the door and into the street, where a passing car struck and killed him on the spot. Gay got charged with second-degree murder, too, and his defense was simple and human, that he was only protecting his girlfriend from a creep and never meant for anybody to die. In 2014, a jury looked at all of it and found him not guilty. The big difference, of course, is that Keenan Gay used his hands and one bad shove, while Williams is accused of emptying a pistol into a man who was already down on the floor. And that's a much harder story to walk 12 people in a jury box through. That's our first story. A young man who had every single door in the world open to him and then closed them all himself in the space of a couple of seconds inside a bar. Our second person never had a stage or a scholarship, and she wasn't the one holding the gun. She's the one it was pointed at. Her name was Amaya Sumlin, and her story is quieter than the first, mostly because the people who are supposed to explain what happened to her have still barely said a word. Amaya Iona Sumlin was born on March 7, 2002, right there in Birmingham, Alabama. She came up through the Birmingham City school system and attended A.H. Parker High School, which is not just any school. It's one of the oldest and most historic black high schools in that entire part of the country, a place with real roots and real pride. By the people who knew her, she was remembered as warm and friendly, the kind of coworker who could leave a good impression on a total stranger in the space of one short conversation. As a grown woman, she worked as a booth attendant at the Birmingham Jefferson Convention Complex, the big downtown venue that hosts the concerts and the conventions and the sporting events, doing guest service work and doing it well enough that people made a point of speaking on it after she was gone. She was a mother with a young son named Royal Amir Brown, and she was engaged to a man named Rodarius Brown. She had a whole life in motion, a steady job, a fiancé, a little boy at home, all the ordinary things that make a person's sudden absence tear such a hole in a family.
The school she came up in tells you a little about the ground she stood on.
A.H. Parker High School goes all the way back to the year 1900, and it was built as a place for black students in Birmingham at a time when that was rare and hard-won, growing into one of the largest and most important schools of its kind in the whole region. Her obituary said she cultivated a deep love for learning and made lasting friendships in those halls, which is the kind of line that hits different when you know how young she was when it all got cut off. She was not somebody chasing fame or running the streets in the headlines. She was a working young woman clocking in at the convention center downtown, raising her son, planning a wedding with the man she loved, moving through her days like most people do, quietly and without any camera pointed at her. That ordinariness is exactly why her story matters, because it could be almost anybody's daughter or sister, and it ended over a fight that nobody has been willing to explain. Now, here is where I have got to be straight with you, because this case is not built like the first one at all. In the DeLand shooting, the police stood up at a podium and walked a room full of reporters through phone records and surveillance footage and autopsy findings, step by step. In Amaya's case, the Birmingham Police Department has said almost nothing beyond the bare bones, only that a physical altercation happened during a gathering and that it ended with her being shot. No motive, no named reason, just a fight, and then a gunshot, and then silence. You have probably already heard the internet rush in to fill that silence with the same word it always reaches for, which is a man. True crime channels ran with video titles about her being shot over a man, and one crime blog wrote that the two women had an ongoing beef that may have involved a man. The problem with all of that is simple. This claim does not come from the police, it does not come from the family, and it does not come from a single court document that anybody can point to. Even the YouTube video that pushed the story the hardest openly admitted that it could not independently confirm any of it, and that same blog managed to get the date of the shooting wrong and spelled the suspect's name wrong on top of everything else. So if you came into this looking for a clean love triangle answer on Amaya, I honestly cannot hand you one. And anybody out here telling you they know for a fact why this happened is straight up guessing. What we actually know is small and painful, and it's worth telling carefully instead of dressing it up, which is exactly what we are going to do for her. What we do know for a fact is the setting, and it is grim in its plainness. Early on Sunday morning, April 6, 2025, at around 6:18 in the morning, officers were called out to a report of a person shot at an apartment complex in the 2800 block of Riverview Road off US 280 in South Birmingham. When they arrived, they found Amaya down with a gunshot wound, and court documents referenced in the reporting say she had been shot in the head. That is the whole crime scene as the public has ever been allowed to see it. A gathering, a fight that nobody in charge has ever explained, and one bullet that ended everything she was building. For a young woman with a son and a wedding ahead of her, that is a cruelly short amount of story, and the people who could tell us more have kept it behind a closed door. Think about how different that is from the case we just walked through. In DeLand, we got iPhone forensics, a timeline down to the minute, an autopsy count, surveillance angles, and a police chief willing to answer questions from a podium. Here in Birmingham, for a young mother shot in the head, we got a short press release and then a wall of quiet. There is no public detail about who else was at that gathering, how the fight actually started, how the gun came into it, or whether the two women even knew each other before that morning. The official language never moved past a physical altercation during a gathering, which is another way of saying that the full truth of Amaya's last night is sitting in a file that the public has never seen. And into that empty space, the internet poured a story it could not back up, which is a pattern we're going to keep running into, because when the facts stay locked away, the rumors always rush in to take their place. There is one more thing worth sitting with about the timing, because it says something about how these situations spin out. This shooting happened at around 6 in the morning, which means whatever this gathering was, it had run all the way through the night into the first light of a Sunday. That's the hour when good sense is usually at its lowest, when people are tired and lit up and slow to walk away from something that a clearer head would have dropped hours before. Somewhere in those early morning hours, a disagreement that could have ended with two people going their separate ways instead ended with a gun coming out. And the person who paid for it was a mother whose son woke up that same morning still expecting her to come home. a little boy who is now going to grow up on the pieces of a story that the grown-ups around him may never be able to fully explain. That's the real cost hiding underneath the phrase physical altercation during a gathering, and it's why we don't just get to shrug this one off as another line in a police blotter. Amaya didn't die at the scene, and honestly, that's one of the most cruel parts of the whole thing, because it meant the people who loved her had to hold their breath for the better part of a week. Birmingham Fire and Rescue rushed her to the University of Alabama Hospital, the region's main trauma center, with injuries the doctors called life-threatening from the jump. She held on inside that hospital for 6 long days. Picture her family sitting in those waiting rooms hour after hour, praying that the young mother with the little boy at home was going to open her eyes and come back to them. On Saturday, April 12, 2025, at 22 minutes past 6 in the evening, she was pronounced dead. She was 23 years old. Her death got counted as the 23rd homicide in Birmingham that year, and the year had barely finished its first 3 months. The woman police say pulled the trigger didn't stay gone for long. Her name is Ivory Maria Jelks, 22 years old, from Birmingham, and after she left the scene, she voluntarily surrendered at Birmingham Police Headquarters.
Sit with that detail for a moment, because it actually matters to the shape of this whole thing. She did not get chased down by a license plate camera the way Williams did in Florida. She walked into a police station on her own 2 feet and gave herself up, which is the move of somebody who was wrestling with either guilt or fear, or maybe some heavy mix of both. She was first held on a 48-hour felony extension at the Birmingham City Jail while the detectives went to work on what they had. The charge against her climbed as Amaya's condition fell, which is its own kind of quiet horror. On April 7th, while Amaya was still fighting for her life at UAB, detectives took the case to the Shelby County District Attorney's Office, which issued a warrant for attempted murder. Then Amaya died, and just like that, there was no longer any attempted left in it. The charge was upgraded to murder, and Jelks was ordered held without any bond at the Shelby County Jail. One young woman was on a table at the medical examiner's office, and another young woman, barely older, was now facing the rest of her life behind bars, all coming out of a fight at a gathering that no official has ever bothered to break down for the public. Those 6 days in between the shooting and the death are worth slowing down on because they are their own quiet piece of the tragedy. UAB is the biggest trauma center in that whole part of Alabama, the place they fly the worst cases to, and it does not get much worse than a young mother with a bullet in her head. Somewhere in that building, machines were doing the breathing for her while her family sat in the hallway with their phones in their hands, waiting on updates from doctors, watching that little boy at home who was too young to understand why his mother was not coming through the door. Every one of those days was a day of hoping, and then on the 6th day, the hoping ran out. That is a long time to live in the space between alive and gone, long enough for a family to start bargaining with God, and it makes the ending land even heavier because they had just enough time to believe she might pull through. And then, almost as quickly as it flared up in the local news, the whole thing went quiet and stayed quiet. This is the part that separates a small case from a headline case, and it is not fair, but it is real. Amaya did not have a famous name attached to her killer, no scholarship, no jersey number, no viral live stream, so the coverage dried up almost overnight. There is no public record of an arraignment beyond those first warrants, no plea, no trial date, and no verdict anywhere in the mainstream reporting. Her family laid her to rest at a celebration of life at the West Side Funeral Home in Fairfield, Alabama, at the end of April, and the machinery of the court kept grinding along behind closed doors where regular people cannot easily follow it. That silence is a story all by itself, and it is a story about who gets attention and who doesn't. When a former football star is charged, the national outlets show up, the press conferences get streamed, and reporters dig through every phone record and court filing they can find. When a young black mother from an apartment complex is killed by another young woman with no famous name attached, the world clicks past it in a day and moves on to the next thing. Amaya's people did not get a podium at a chief answering questions. They got a funeral and a case that slipped into the quiet.
That's not a knock on the police so much as it is a hard truth about how these things go, and it is exactly why channels and communities keep telling stories like hers, so that the young woman who worked the booth downtown and loved learning and was about to get married doesn't just become a number on a year-end homicide list. It also leaves us in an uncomfortable but honest place, which is that we may never get the full why. The court could bring it out someday if the case goes to trial, or it could all get resolved behind closed doors in a plea we never hear the details of. Either way, the version that spread fastest, the over a man version, is the one with the least proof behind it, and choosing to sit with the uncertainty instead of running with the rumor is the only fair thing to do for somebody who cannot speak for herself anymore. So, let me put a real bow on what this case actually is, and let me do it honestly instead of dressing it up for clicks. A 23-year-old mother went to a gathering, got into a fight that nobody in authority has ever explained publicly, and got shot one time in the head by another young woman who then walked herself into a police station and gave up. The word man hangs over it all because that's the story the internet always wants to tell, but the receipts for that story simply do not exist yet, and it would be doing Amaya dirty to pretend that they do. Her little boy is growing up without his mother over a fight whose true reason may never once be said out loud in public. Hold on to that feeling for a minute, because our third story is that exact same nightmare with the volume cranked all the way up. And unlike Amaya's case, this one was captured on camera from start to finish for the whole world to see. That's two people now, both from cases where a fight between folks who knew each other ended with somebody in the ground. Our third story lives in the same city as Amaya's, Birmingham, Alabama, but it didn't slip away in silence in a hospital bed over 6 days. This one played out loud and fast, live in front of a phone that was streaming straight to the internet, and by the time it was over, an apartment courtyard had soaked up almost 170 bullets. To really understand it, you have to meet two young women who got pulled together by the oldest and most worthless reason in the book. The one who died was Aisha Elise Poole, 21 years old, and by everybody who loved her, she was a sweet, family-first young mother trying to make it. She had a 4-year-old daughter named Aria who had just started pre-kindergarten the very week of the shooting, which tells you exactly where her head was on getting her baby set up right. The tragedy was already stacking on her before that night too, because Aria's father had died only weeks earlier in late July of 2024, which means that little girl was about to lose both her parents within a single summer. Aisha lived at the Monarch Ridge Apartments on Gallant Drive in East Birmingham, a complex that already carried a long, ugly history of gunfire, so heavy that the city had actually gone after the property in court over its violence years before any of this. That was the world she was raising her daughter in. By the people closest to her, Aisha was remembered as a soft, sweet young woman who put everything she had into that little girl. Her best friend described her as the kind of mama who didn't come up short on her child, who spent what she had and gave what she could so her daughter would have a normal, happy life, even in a complex where gunfire was almost background noise. That's what makes Aria's situation so hard to even talk about. This baby had already lost her father weeks before, and now she was about to lose the one parent she had left, which means a 4-year-old walked into pre-kindergarten that week with 2 living parents and came out the other side of that summer an orphan. The people who loved Aisha held a balloon release for her not long after, a small, aching kind of goodbye for somebody who was only 21 and was just trying to raise her kid in peace. The other young woman was Janiyah Hendricks, 19 years old, and she came out of her own long line of grief. Her father, Justin Hendricks Sr., had been ambushed and shot dead at a Homewood ATM back in 2022, right after leaving church with his mother, in a case that was never solved. Her own mother had spoken out publicly and painfully about the cycle of retaliation killings eating up their community, about how tired she was of people who lived together and buried each other instead of loving each other. Janiyah had no real public record before all of this, just a young woman living in a city that had already taken her father, and was about to take a whole lot more from everybody involved. Her brother, Justin Jr., the one they called Junebug, would end up charged as one of the shooters, which means this one night pulled two of Marcella Hendrix's children into a murder case at the same time. It's hard to look at a family that buried a father to an unsolved ambush and then watched a son get charged with murder and a daughter get charged with theft in the same summer and not feel the weight of how these cycles just keep feeding themselves, generation after generation, in the same few zip codes. What makes this case sting even more is how avoidable it looks on paper. This was not two strangers who bumped into each other in the wrong place. This was a beef that had been building online, a back and forth over a boy that got hyped up through posts and messages until the two of them agreed to settle it in person, the way too many young people now settle things, in a parking lot with an audience watching on a live stream. Aisha even pulled out her own phone and started broadcasting it, turning what should have been a private, stupid argument into a public event, and that decision to record it is a big part of why the police later were able to piece together exactly who did what. The camera meant to capture a win ended up capturing a killing.
Here is the reason the two of them ever crossed paths in the first place. And unlike Amaya's case, this reason is actually on the record for more than one direction. The whole thing grew out of a dispute over a man, and the fight itself was set up through social media. And this one is not just loose internet chatter, which is important. Asia's own best friend, Demarion Rankins, who was shot himself that same night, said it plainly to a reporter with a camera in his face. Listen to how small and how stupid the reason really was.
I talked with Rankins Thursday, who told me the whole thing started from social media beef about a shared love interest.
The zone is very small. It's literally so little. Somebody mad about somebody.
Later on, a Birmingham homicide detective would testify in court that the fight was an ongoing dispute over a guy and that it had been planned through social media, which is about as official as a reason ever gets to be. So this is the real difference between Story 2 and Story 3. With Amaya, the over a man line is a rumor floating around with no source behind it. With Asia Poole, that same line came straight out of her best friend's mouth on camera and out of a detective's testimony under oath in a courtroom. Same reason, completely different level of proof. On the night of August 20th, 2024, right around 10 in the evening, the two of them met up to fight at Monarch Ridge, and Asia was streaming the whole thing on Facebook Live before it even started. The video is pure chaos, people talking trash, phones held up, everybody hyped for a fist fight and nothing more than that. Listen to the moment right before it all went sideways, when somebody on that stream actually says out loud that there are no weapons out here, that this is just supposed to be a fight between two girls.
We finna fight, bitches! Oh! The fuck you just said that, bitch? We don't got no weapons, bitch!
No weapons. That was the plan on paper. A fist fight over a boy. The kind of dumb thing that should have ended with a couple of bruises and 100 people arguing about who won in the group chat the next morning. But somewhere in the middle of that same live stream, you can also hear the warning that the fists were not going to stay fists for long. A voice out in the dark promising that this was about to turn into something a whole lot worse than a scuffle.
My brother out here, girl, he gonna shoot back. Girl, my brother out here, he gonna shoot back. You better not shoot that shit, pop, pop.
The fight itself went pretty much the way these things always go at the start. Asia and Janaya tangled up in the parking lot, even fighting on top of Asia's own car, while people tried to reach in and pull the two of them apart. Asia backed off and moved toward the breezeway of her building, standing behind her sister, clearly done with the whole thing. And that should have been the end of it, the same exact way the DeLand argument should have died in the parking lot, and the same way Amaya's gathering should have ended with nothing worse than hurt feelings. Instead of anybody walking away, the guns came out. What happened next is almost hard to put into words because it was not one shooter losing his temper in a corner. It was a whole group opening fire on a courtyard packed with people. Listen to the Birmingham police chief put a number on it that honestly sounds made up until you remember the entire thing was streaming live and caught on the complex cameras.
A physical altercation occurred between our homicide victim and another female. At some point, gunfire erupted and approximately 168 rounds were fired from multiple shooters.
168 rounds coming out of multiple weapons, and some of those weapons were fitted with switches that turn a regular pistol into something that fires like a machine gun. Cars got shot to pieces, apartment windows got shot out, a woman's glass table shattered inside her own living room while she was just trying to survive the night. And in the middle of all that flying lead, Asia Poole was hit one time in the back and killed, while her best friend Demarion Rankins was shot in the hip and lived to tell it. Almost 170 bullets fired into that courtyard, and the young mother died from just one of them. Janiyah, in the middle of all that, jumped into Asia's car, which was still running, and drove it off a short distance away at a chicken restaurant parking lot. And that single act is what got her charged at all. The gunmen scattered off into the night, but Janiyah herself did not fire a single shot, and that is the reason her charge sits so far apart from everybody else's. Watch the reporter break down who is facing what, and pay attention to how light her charge really is next to the men who showed up carrying the guns.
Victoria Woods, Justin Hendricks, and Taylor McLeod are being held without bond on murder charges. At last check, Justin's sister, Janiyah, is in jail on a $30,000 bond for auto theft, but more charges could be coming in the future.
That is the strange, twisted heart of this whole case. Janiyah is the one who started the fight and then drove off in the dead woman's car, but she was only charged with first-degree auto theft and let back out on a $30,000 bond. The murder charges landed on the shooters instead. And among those shooters was her own brother, Justin Junebug Hendricks, right alongside Taylor Paper-Out Tay, a Correa Woods, and a 17-year-old boy. In May of 2025, a grand jury indicted 4 of them for murder, and Janiyah's name was not on that list. So the young woman at the center of the beef walks around on bond while her brother sits in a cell facing the rest of his life. Which is its own kind of tragedy, layered on top of a family that had already buried their father. Now, the defense in this case is trying something bold, and you need to hear it because it is the entire fight going forward. They're claiming self-defense, arguing that somebody standing on Asia's side of the courtyard actually fired first. Watch the reporter lay out the claim, and then watch the wall the detective ran that claim straight into.
Now, the other suspects who traveled to that apartment complex that summer, August night, are claiming self-defense. And their defense attorneys speaking on their behalf in the courtroom this morning that their clients, on behalf of their clients, that someone else in the breezeway where Asia Poole was standing fired first.
The problem for that argument is the physical evidence, or really the total lack of it. The detective who testified said police did not find any shell casings at all in the breezeway where Asia was standing, and that is a real problem if you are trying to convince a jury the first shots came flying out of her side. As things stand right now, one of the shooters, Correa Woods, was granted a $250,000 bond and later pleaded not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, while others sit without any bond and no trial date has been set for any of them. The city's much bigger fight is with the guns themselves and the switches that made a fistfight into a war zone. Listen to the police chief talk about just how common those switches have gotten out on Birmingham streets.
That's a challenge. You know, they're just as prevalent as firearms, so it's a challenge. But we've taken over 1,100 guns off the streets of Birmingham just this year. In previous years, we've taken over 2,000 guns off the street in those years as well. So,
if you're sitting there thinking a woman killing another woman over a man is some rare one-in-a-million thing, it is not. And one of the clearest examples anywhere happened out in Texas. In 2022, a woman named Caitlin Armstrong tracked down a professional cyclist named Mariah Wilson, who had briefly dated Armstrong's boyfriend, and shot her 3 times inside a friend's home. Armstrong then ran, and she did not run to the next town over. She fled all the way to Costa Rica for 43 days, even getting plastic surgery to change her own face, before U.S. Marshals finally caught her by answering an ad she had posted advertising herself as a yoga teacher. In 2023, she was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 90 years, and on top of that, Wilson's family later won a $15 million wrongful death judgment against her.
The difference between her and the Poole case is that Armstrong did it alone and cold, planned and quiet, while Asia Poole's death was a whole mob with switches on their guns, turning a parking lot into a shooting gallery. The reason sitting underneath both of them, though, was the exact same tired one. So here is what quietly ties Avante Williams, Amaya Sumlin, and Asia Poole together across 3 different cities and 2 different states. Williams looked a man up on Instagram and then emptied a pistol inside a bar over a girlfriend. Amaya went to a gathering and got shot 1 time in the head over a fight that nobody in charge will explain, while the internet keeps insisting it was about a man it cannot even name. And Asia Poole set up a fist fight over a boy on Facebook Live and got caught in 168 bullets fired by people who showed up to a girl fight carrying weapons of war. 3 arguments that all could have ended with everybody just driving home mad. 3 people who never got to drive home at all. The lesson underneath all of it is simple, and it's old, and honestly, both of those police chiefs said it better than I ever could. When emotions are running high and the reason for the beef is a fight over a person who is not worth a single human life, the smartest and hardest thing anybody can do is put the guns down and walk away, because the second that trigger gets pulled, not one piece of it can ever be taken back. A jealous argument was never worth a coffin, and it never will be. 3 families in 3 cities are living with that math right now, doing the same grief on repeat, and not one of them can go back and unpull a single trigger. All any of us can learn from it and pass the warning on before the next argument turns into the next headline. Rest in peace to Kashad Harris, to Amaya Sumlin, and to Asia Poole. If you know somebody who is 1 bad night, 1 wrong crowd, or 1 stupid argument away from becoming a story just like these, send them this video. Because the person who really needs to hear "put it down and go home" is almost always the one who is dead sure it could never be them.